Every single day, Accenture is blazing new trails in technology and business. That's no easy task, and honestly, sometimes borders on the impossible. This is precisely why they hire people with the attitude and aptitude for doing the impossible, and I'm talking about U.S. military veterans. That's why Accenture is ranked as one of the best employers for veterans, both by the Military Times and Forbes. And it's why Accenture, at its very core, is all about supporting the military community. So are you a U.S. military veteran looking for a fresh start? Don't worry. Accenture speaks your language, a language of respect, commitment, leadership, teamwork, and dedication. This is who Accenture is. Learn more at accenture.com/military.
So, hi, Richmond. Welcome to another session of rvatech Talks. Today, we have a guest we're really excited about. His name is Chris Busse. Oh my God, did I say that correctly?
Yeah, see, I was wondering. It's it's Busse, but just like bus and the letter E. But like every time I go to Germany and they look at me funny because I'm pretty sure my family isn't pronouncing it the right way for generations.
Busse, Chris.
And so it's
Busse.
the S is a S set or a Scharf S. It's a double S, and so it's Busse or Busse and that's just way awkward.
At least I didn't call you Chris Busse.
Right.
Yeah, awesome. So we're excited to have you on the podcast today, and we always like to start off with sort of maybe a little bit of a history of how do you become sort of the chief digital officer that you are today at Terazo. Where did your journey start, and what kind of motivated you to get into tech?
Good question. Wow. Yeah, it's been a long journey. So I'm a Richmond native. Went to Henrico County Schools, graduated from Godwin in 96, and also went to the Hermitage Technical Center. So I was what we called back then a rvatech kid. Got on the bus, went over there with all the folks who were learning trades like auto mechanics and HVAC and stuff like that. And I was doing a program called Computer Information Systems. And I'd always had computers in the house, or we'd always had them. My dad was a teacher at what is now Quioccasin Middle School. It was Bird Middle School back in the day. And he actually had, I guess it was Bird Middle School computer number 1. It was an Apple II Plus, I guess in 1982, sometime between 1982 and 1984, whenever they got that. He brought it home for a summer because nobody knew what to do with computers in the classrooms. They weren't even in the classrooms. They got rolled around on a cart and put outside the classroom, and that was always a big day. And so I really always had that love for computers, and I was not the most academically focused student back in the day. And so when I saw the opportunity to really do something that could guide me towards a professional career in computers sooner rather than later, I jumped at that. And so I did junior year of high school, did the first year at Hermitage Technical Center. And then the second year, they had what I called work release, but it was really, it's called, something where you basically get a job. And I wanted to get deeper into software development. And so I was actually taking a night class at J. Sargent Reynolds Community College right there on North Parham Road. And it was in Visual Basic 3. And so that kind of dates it. It was the programming language du jour there for Windows. And there was a guy in that class, and I don't think he'll mind me mentioning his name, by the name of Terry Johnson, and he's still around here in Richmond in the tech community. And he was complaining he couldn't get his homework done because his assistant had quit. And I said, "Hey, I'll be your assistant." And he said, "Aren't you that kid that's in high school that's here in the class?" I was like, yeah, but hear me out. Like, if you make me an offer and it's like 4 hours during the morning, and then I go back to school, like, I can take the job and the school will sign off for it. He's like, "Well, let me see what my manager has to say." And so, one thing led to another there, and I was actually hired.
That's so enterprising.
It was one of those things where you just kind of raise your hand or speak up, and because nothing to lose at that point, right? And so I got to go work at the Virginia Department of Health at the Office of Emergency Medical Services, which at the time was directly across the street from J. Sargent Reynolds there on North Parham. And so I would go there in the morning and work a half day. And I was doing desktop server support, doing a little bit of software development because it wasn't really a software developer
And you
job.
were like 17 years old?
Yes, I was. It was March. Yeah, I was 17 years old. I turned 18 that last semester of my senior year while I was working there.
Wow.
And so it's pretty awesome.
Can I pause you right?
Sure. Yeah.
I just wanted to pause you at this moment in your life and maybe try to capture what about technology made you feel good? Like, like I guess you were drawn to it at an early age. Like, what was the feeling that you got working with technology that, like, maybe on your best days now that you feel, you're like, man, this is why I got into it. But like at that moment in your life, like, what about technology drew you to it?
Yeah, so I think if we look back, right, so this would have been 1996, so really before the dot-com boom, right? So if you have a comment section, somebody in the comments might talk about when the World Wide Web did or did not come about. I was on the internet and BBSs prior to it, and so what I started to see was this emerging connectivity between people across the globe, and that's what really excited me. I was into it for this really emerging web development. And it was interesting because at the time also virtual reality was like a really big thing. In fact, if you go back like through the archives of Wired magazine, before Tim Berners-Lee came up with the www spec at CERN or whatever, it was all about email and encryption and cyberpunks and virtual reality. Like virtual reality was going to be the next big thing. And it's interesting to see that now coming back around. And so I was doing stuff with virtual reality software through the education program. And I just liked that you could take a creative idea, you could put it out there, and then you had kind of an audience around the globe of people who were interested in your topic, right? It connected niche topics. And we see that now, right? It's come very much to fruition where we don't even think about it. I don't think, it's part of our everyday life through niche Facebook groups and Twitter hashtags and things like that. But back then, I mean, it was unheard of, right? It's like, there's the kids you rode bikes with in the neighborhood, the folks you drove around and hung out with on a Friday night. Maybe you had a pen pal or something like that, from somebody you met at camp. But this global audience was really opening up. And so I really liked that you could find a place for creative ideas and really get them out there. And that's what I think excited me about technology at the time. And there's a certain bit about the software development aspect of things that appealed to me because you could take, processes or concepts that existed in a business or an organization and put some structure around them and some process around them and things like that. And that was really neat. And then when I got that job working for the Office of EMS, I mean, that was really meaningful work. Like we were doing all of the training and certification of EMTs, paramedics of all levels, as well as all the licensure and certification and inspection of every EMS agency in the state, all their equipment, everything, and getting to be a part of building systems that helped run that. It was just like, this is actually like taking what I'm learning here and what I think is this cool creative stuff I mess around with on the computer, like building space stations and virtual reality software. Now I get to take those same skills and apply it to like actually helping contribute to the efforts of, statewide regulation of EMS agencies and getting money to, rural agencies to help them serve otherwise underserved populations and stuff like that. So it's just like a lot of the impact where, if I guess I take all those concepts and really distill it down into one thing, the efforts of an individual, the creative ideas of an individual or a small team can truly be multiplied through building them in technology and then distributing that through like the globally connected internet, which again was still very much a nascent thing there, relatively nascent thing there in 1996.
I once heard that you're the average of the 5 people that are closest to you. And honestly, the older I get, the more I realize that this is totally true and that the company you keep is a huge part of who you are. This is no different when it comes to business and cloud computing. And it's exactly why Accenture and their world-famous cloud practice is the leading partner for AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. Not to mention the #1 co-innovator with SAP and Oracle in the cloud. So whether you're a company that's moving to the cloud for the first time or a company trying to combine disparate cloud initiatives into a single cohesive strategy, something that can hypercharge the business, Accenture is the partner of choice. And that goes for any industry from banking, retail, government, energy, and so on. To learn more, check out accenture.com/cloud.
Can we pause your story right here for a second and go back to virtual reality for a second? Because I'm really, I love talking about sort of the history and the culture of VR and has it or has it not really taken off? And so with the perspective of what you were seeing or studying or doing in 1996 and where we are today, do you feel like now we're at the kind of that point where it's going to take off into the mainstream and we're going to see, real applications in it for industry? Or do you feel like it's still an awesome dream, but there's still a sense of like nicheness to it? So what is your opinion around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if we take industry, right, and let's separate it out into entertainment and then everything else, right? I see it starting like with the Oculus, right? So starting to see the Oculus equipment. Like I was in Best Buy the other day with my 13-year-old daughter, and we were getting her a new computer, and she saw the Oculus display, and she said, "Oh yeah, I think my cousin who's 10, I think he's gonna get one of those, or he's asking for one for Christmas." And I was like, all right, well, if he gets one and then he plays it for more than 3 months and you like it, maybe when your birthday comes around in May, we can talk about that. So I think it has a place in entertainment. And then I know of a friend that works for one of the larger, I guess it's commercial construction companies. And I know he was piloting some stuff with the Oculus for things like building walkthroughs and things like that. I don't know exactly like the web, so like things like, let's say web browsing, right? Or video on the web. If those are mainstream, I don't ever see, at least maybe in this lifetime, VR becoming mainstream to that extent. The concepts around augmented reality, though, are what interest me more. I mean, I remember, gosh, how long ago was that Yelp came out with the augmented reality view where you could do a camera overlay and see which direction down the street the restaurants with their various ratings were. I think that's very, very interesting. But I think just the fact that to get to that VR experience, you have to put on this headset. And yes, that can be shrunk to a certain extent with the miniaturization of electronics, but I don't see it ever getting shrunk to the extent. So let me back up there. To do VR, I think you have to block out the real reality, right? So you can miniaturize the electronics, but just what it takes to physically create those barriers around the real reality, I mean, that just gets awkward and it gets disorienting. And so I think, I don't see like 12 people around in a room. And I've seen like, on Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook page, he's showing things where he's like almost doing telepresence with the Oculus and virtual reality for meetings and stuff like that. Gosh, everybody is Zoom exhausted. Well, now imagine being Zoom exhausted, plus you've been wearing a 3-pound piece of gear on your head all day long, right? I don't see that as a step in the right direction. So, I don't know if that answers the question, Julia, but I think that, it's going to find its place and it will keep advancing. But I think it's one of those things where, maybe before it was a solution in search of a problem. And now there's so much technology, I think it's created as a solution in search of a problem. And as the problems are found, some of them like, ubiquitous access to information across the globe and publishing that the World Wide Web gives us, it solves so many things. Virtual reality, I think, will always have some subset of use cases that it's addressing there. But I do think augmented reality, especially with everybody having the phones in their pocket, I think that is super interesting. And I just saw, Facebook just came out with this partnership with Ray-Bans. I think they're kind of making another go at what Google tried to do with Google Glass, but doing it a bit differently. And, maybe the next step is some small screen projection into the next variation of those to put that information in your field of view. That kind of stuff I could see taking off more so than true full-on immersive virtual reality.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. I guess we can continue on your journey up to CDO now, unless Ford, do you have any comments on VR?
I'm holding back so many questions because I know this we could spend the entire time talking about VR. But and like its impacts on society and like how we could use it for good and all that stuff. But how about can I ask a follow-up question from your story?
Sure.
So when was the first? Maybe could you tell me the story of the first moment that you felt really good at your job? So you're doing this desktop support. You're doing sort of like probably with increasing responsibility as you go through, start out in high school and then you're doing the technical school at Hermitage and, maybe going to get a degree and then maybe you're in the professional world. At what point in the story, and maybe it happened when you were a desktop support person for, at Hermitage, or maybe it happened in college, or maybe it happened with your first job, or maybe it happened in a subsequent job. But like, when did you first feel like, okay, I've figured out the specific way in which I am good at being a technologist, and this will be my sort of platform to stand on as I grow my career and become better at what I do.
Yeah, good question there. I'll start by saying, so I actually got, just to put a quick capstone on that story, I got hired by the Virginia Department of Health full time right when I graduated high school. And so actually, while I did some classes at J. Sargent Reynolds and I did some classes at VCU, I never actually applied to either of those. I don't have a college degree. I went straight that vocational route. It was back then,
that's amazing.
2 years or a bachelor's degree. So I'm a huge supporter of like vocational schools and like alternative forms of education. So I like the boot camp, the stuff that's going on at U of R, the stuff that like locally, like Kim Mahan's doing with Max Potential, all of that stuff. I'm a huge supporter and proponent of that because that was my own background going through what it was then. I think the thing
that is so awesome to
hear. Yeah. I think the thing that was, and I can't put an exact date on it, like, oh, it was this exact moment where I did this thing, and it wasn't like one of these big like, oh, the server crashed and you saved the company because you restored it from backup tapes kind of thing or anything like that. For me, it was really when people started telling me that I could take that kind of desktop support role. It was everything from upgrading the memory on people's computers or fixing a blown power supply, but there was also a lot of tutoring or teaching, people who were maybe, at that time primarily still used typewriters. I mean, it was the Department of Health, right? In 1996, we still had forms that were done in quadruplicate, I think, not just triplicate, like the carbonless paper, and moving some of those systems to computer-based systems and being able to work with people that did not grow up. I mean, the term, nobody was really digital natives then, right? That came, I think, a little bit after that. So whatever was like not even professionally trained on computers, and being able to take somebody who's later in career and have them say to me like, oh, you really took this technical concept, this complex concept, and helped me understand it. And now I can do something in my work, right? So you're empowering people to take that, not technology for technology's sake or because it's cool, but actually getting the job done, right? Making them more productive. And so I think it was, pretty early on in my career where I found that seeing the impact of somebody, even if it wasn't the stuff I was into exactly, because I'm not trying to do data entry a whole lot or things like that, right? But for them, that was their job. That was what was important. And seeing them make that step change in their career and helping them adapt successfully to this new way of working. I think that was the moment I had where it's like, okay, like not only is that I'm getting to build certain cool things I like or build this, software that the office is going to use, but also I can sit down with somebody on a one-to-one level and really have an impact on how they themselves can appreciate and use the technology there.
For sure. So it was really early on that you had that moment.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I used to
feel like you were able to empower people.
Yeah. Yeah. It was definitely, I think a lot of that was just having a lot of patience. There's that SNL skit. I think it was Ben Stiller played the character. I might be wrong about that. And he was like the computer guy. And the whole joke was he would come to somebody's desk and he'd go, move and slide. I think it was like Jennifer Aniston was playing the user or something, slide her out of the chair and get in there and have to do everything very impatient with the user. And I think that was kind of a bad stereotype that sometimes IT folks get. And I think, I haven't always had patience, and I still to this day don't always have patience and everything, but definitely learning that as a skill and learning how much just taking a little bit of patience with people as they went on their own learning journey could yield really good results there.
And I can imagine that this sort of patience is more and more required as you sort of, get into roles like CTO and CDO, where really you're presenting sort of the face of technology to probably, I can imagine, many non-technologists. I don't know if you wanted to expand on that or anything, but like what is it maybe what is the one skill that originally, like maybe a technologist who's just coming right out of vocational school or high school, whatnot, doesn't have that really differentiates that person from a CTO or a CDO? Is that patience or is it something else?
So I think it's related, right? Because I think what you're doing is you're taking whatever the technical concept is, right? So in my work now, sometimes it's we tend to work with people who are in some sort of enterprise and they are charged with innovation in that enterprise. It's funny when we talk to our marketing agency, they're like, what are the job titles we can target on LinkedIn of the people you would like to see the ad for? I'm like, well, it's not that simple, right? It's whoever's in an enterprise charged with innovation. And so whether you're doing something at scale in an enterprise or one-on-one sitting down with a user, helping them understand a new piece of software, you're taking these technical concepts or what the technology, the enabling effect that the technology or the solution can have, and you're putting it into the context that they can understand. So oftentimes, we get in sometimes these partnership conversations with other technology product providers, and they're like, well, you should use our database over this other person's database. How are you positioning what database product you're recommending to your customer? And I say, well, a lot of times customers just say, solve this problem for us. And, they might do a little bit of due diligence or maybe they say, as long as it can run on AWS or can run in the cloud, we don't care what database you use, right? If it's open source, it doesn't cost, right? And oversimplifying there a little bit, but it's really, it's about, again, like at a desktop, it's like, oh, this is back then, a 46 with 32 megabytes of RAM, da, 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 da. And it's like, what does that mean to somebody? Well, it just means your work gets done faster. And so when you scale that up, it's really about just scaling up the same kind of concepts about presenting the technical solution really as an abstraction in the business context and what that means from an outcomes perspective for that business. So it's really taking, again, complex technology concepts, whatever they are, and translating into something that's very relevant that I think when it comes to these business type things, oftentimes then they take, a client or somebody like that would take inside their own enterprise and advocate in the sort of the language or the messaging that they've learned or that we've helped them with. Mm-hmm. So they can carry that forward and talk about, oh yeah, this whole solution we're getting from this company, it's going to do this for us. And I think really that's the key.
So when you're talking about value, when you're translating, some like very specific technology features into value to, I guess, peers or leadership or whatever, what are some of the key metrics you're looking at? Like the ones that come to mind are like, obviously there's dollars, but like the ones that you use the most, is it like margins on products? Is it human resource costs? Is it operational costs? Like where like when you're just thinking about all the different times you've sat down and looked at a technology and tried to translate it into, like, I think you mentioned getting your work done faster. Like what are, I'm sure that's one of many ways, many outcomes of that translation, but what are some of the things that like, that you've maybe seen in your career where you're like, I guess just off the top of your head that is the direct outcome of that translation from technology to value?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said get the work done faster. So much of the work, even if I think back to some of the work that we were doing in, from 96 to 98 when I was at the Office of EMS, we did this mobile computing, pen computing initiative for the field reps who inspected the EMS agencies and the ambulances. And it was based on Lotus Notes, and it could sync. They could dial up on a modem when they got back. There were 6 of them throughout the state. So there's one guy like in the Appalachian Mountains or something, right? Dials up, syncs it back, versus, again, those quadruplicate forms that they would have to fill out on paper and then mail in that would then be manually transcribed into an Oracle system. And it was about getting greater accuracy of the data. So you're limiting transcription error. So accuracy is one, getting the data in faster, and still see that today, right? We talk about, swivel chair integrations, right? Where somebody is typing something from one system and maybe they're not swiveling to another computer, but maybe they're pulling up another system and then re-entering the data. Maybe they do that 5 times for a service ticket for something.
What did you call that? A swivel system?
So, swivel chair. So if you imagine somebody...
Chair. No, I got the vision. I'm just, I wanted to make sure I got the, so people call that like the swivel chair problem. Is that like how that's used?
the swivel chair problem, because it's the idea that maybe you have also like a filing cabinet 90 degrees to your left, and then you've got your computer in front of you and like an outbox 90 degrees to your right. So you swivel your chair to the filing cabinet, you pull the file that came in or open the mail that came in, you transcribe it in your computer, and then you put it in the other pile to go on to the next person, right? And that's so yeah, we call that swivel chair, and you still see that today. And so I said sometimes it's just about, you're not swiveling the chair literally, but you're switching between applications and retyping information.
Right.
You see that a lot now in call centers and contact centers. So we do a ton of work in the contact center space, and I always have to catch myself because I still habitually will say call center, but we're in an age of SMS and web chat and things like that. So it's contact center. And, I've seen instances where a contact center agent might have 30 different systems to service a population of customers that are nationwide, where the company grew by acquisition. And so no wonder it's like you get on the phone with them. It's like, well, hang on. Let me put you on hold while I pull it up in my other system. Did it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, you know what? It's in this system, but it's not in that system. That's like that same kind of swivel chair concept. And so you can solve that through integration, through abstracting those multiple systems and databases out through single screens for those agents. But to your measurement question, there's time and accuracy. I think that
is margins ever one? Like, we may not care about the speed to delivery, but when we get this delivered, our margins going forward are going to be that much better. Like, is that a common?
Yeah, they can. I mean, I think and what I was kind of leading up to there, I think, is it goes to the old adage, right? Time is money, right? And so where we can do work to affect things through time and accuracy can be a precursor to time, right? Because things are not accurate, require rework. And then there can be all kinds of other follow-on effects if something is not accurate, right? But time is money. And so whether it's margins or get into a lot of what we call, or what is called like a quote to cash. So if I'm in some kind of complex sale, if I'm a business that has some kind of complex sale, from the moment I quote out this complex, whatever it is that I'm selling the person, or usually in a B2B kind of context, to the point where I can bill and receive the money, right? If you look at, there can be long, many, many multi-step processes. And you get into all kinds of like lean process engineering design, which can be done as formally or informally. Some people just know like, hey, there's this one spot here. And if we could pay you $500,000 to do this integration, we will immediately save $3 million a year. Right. And so I think that I would have to say, to your question specifically about margin, certainly I think a lot of the work that we do contributes to that, again, through the old time is money adage. But I think oftentimes that's a little bit further downstream, or is sometimes a longer measurement. And then what I think you come to see is in a business that is complex, there can be many, many variables that contribute to margin. Right.
And most of them, to your point, are probably speed. It comes down to some measure of time.
Speed and quality. And then on the other side too, you get into then what is the size of your customer base, and through these improvements or through other work, if you're working a marketing type use case, are you increasing your customer base, right? So are you increasing top line revenue, right? So you can, some of these things you can attack from a top line revenue or customer retention, or, longer lifetime value, higher average contract value, just depending on, again, it can be very dependent on what the business use case is. So a lot of times it's looking at what are the goals of the business or the department or the group or whatever, the initiative that we're working with, and measuring the things that we can control, right? So it's like, if you have a batch process and we're doing an API integration that will turn that to real time, speed and accuracy or something we control, that is what we as a vendor should be measured by. Further down the line, we know we're contributing to what the business overall needs, and you get recognized for your contributions to that. But that margin can be a little bit more abstract and complex sometimes, I think.
A follow-up. No, go ahead, Ford. It's all yours.
No, I've been right my mouth.
Okay.
You got the stage.
I was going to question, or next question from my end was, you were talking about sort of technology being an enabler. It speeds up processes and things like that. Where, in your opinion, if at all, do APIs play a role here? Is that a concept that kind of emerged because we needed, I guess, abstracting it, processes to move faster, or is it more of a technology concept of like we needed systems to integrate better or people to access our services better? How do APIs play in this space?
And honestly, just to interject really quick, if you want to tell the story of APIs, I'm sure a lot of people don't know like how APIs came about and like the idea that led up to it. So feel free to take as wide of an angle on this question as you want, because I love this question.
Sure. And I can answer that. And maybe, since we started with a little bit with the lens of my own career journey, I can kind of answer how I saw them emerge over my career journey. And I think that'll kind of come back around to Julia, what you're asking for, because I think, you mentioned better integrated systems, and I heard you also say abstractions. And I think both of those things are true. So we go back to 96, right? You had that example of we had a Lotus Notes system for doing ambulance inspections that they would then dial up from this pen computer, and it would actually upload to this Lotus Notes database. And for those of you that haven't ever used Lotus Notes, which is probably the majority of the listeners, it was kind of like web pages. And honestly, the user interface looks a lot like what Salesforce still looks like now. Like it's just very blocky squares, like text input fields, things like that. But we still had this Oracle system that was the main system of record. And I remember to get the Oracle system to talk to the Lotus Notes system was its own entire body of work. And I think we had this contractor down from Canada or something that was like one of the few people that had done that kind of thing before. And I remember, I think we had to spend thousands of dollars for this ODBC. So ODBC Open Database Connector thing that could get the Lotus Notes and the Oracle to talk to each other. And it was still like ODBC connectors were kind of the thing, and they're still around, right? But it's the thing that lets your software connect to a database, right? How you send those SQL queries, right? Select star from accounts where blah, blah, blah equals. I mean, to this day, you can have your, Microsoft Excel connect to I guess Microsoft Access is still around, or an Oracle database or whatever through this ODBC connector. But that is a very tightly coupled thing, right? There's no abstraction, to your point, Julia. And then what you see is this, the DBA would control the database and the software developer would control the software. And a lot of the business logic would get written into the database in the form of stored procedures or views or things like that. And a lot of that was really for performance reasons, because I think in larger enterprises, the volume of data greatly exceeded the computing capacity that was readily available to these enterprises. And I mean, back then, before the SSD drives, you would talk about, all right, how are we going to physically connect these drives such that this database, literally like how fast the drives spin on their spindle, and the read-write heads go across the drive platters. Like that was like we had meetings about that kind of stuff, right? While still maintaining drive redundancy. And so I guess everything's now is on SSD in the cloud, and you don't worry about that as much. You don't have just deep discussions about, RAID 0 through RAID 5 and all that. But and certainly not having to have RAID drives fail, because that was an awful day whenever that happened. But anyway, so back to the question there, right? So you had these ODBC connections. So it was this very tightly coupled thing, client server architectures are what was used then, right? And if, heaven forbid, you wanted another application to use the same database, right? Or heaven forbid, you had 2 or 3 databases that you wanted to work together in the same system. It was just very, there was a certain level of complexity and a certain level of, I would say, inflexibility to it, right? It was not flexible, because I want to be careful to make sure that we don't think, or we don't put forth a picture that modern API architectures are in any way less complex. And in fact, in many ways, especially when you start to get into the concept of microservices, which is small APIs that do a single thing that are independently deployable, buildable, deployable, and controllable there, right? You actually end up creating a lot more complexity. But to your question there, Julia, about the abstraction, you're creating this abstraction. And one of the refrains that I often use in my role today in my meeting is that abstraction creates freedom, right? So with APIs, instead of having this tightly coupled connection between a server with a database and your clients, this heavy client software that you have to install on the computer. You generally have this lightweight client, right? Usually a web browser these days. And then it connects to, through to a web server that's connecting back to an API server through an API gateway. And honestly, sometimes it is, APIs all the way down, the whole turtles all the way down kind of thing. Like, for example, you might have, looking at take a generic banking example, you might have a bank account balance that you're pulling up on your Apple Watch that is pulling from a web server that is pulling a REST API that's going to a SOAP API that's still going back into some old service bus, back to some old, still green screen controlled, won't name any specific vendors there, but transaction database. So you still have that old technology, but you've put these layers of abstraction. And so now you introduce these layers where you can enforce like enterprise level business rules.
So wait, pause real quick.
Yeah.
So what year are we right now? So at that first tier of like API design, when does that become prolific? Before we get to the point where enterprises
I skipped over, I think, so if we're really looking from a historic perspective, so I was starting in 1996 where you had the ODBC connections, and then don't quote me on the exact timing, but I remember becoming aware of during the dot-com boom, so let's say around 99 or so, becoming aware of concepts around CORBA, right? So component object relationship broker architecture. I might
Is that like the service bus type stuff, or the service-oriented architecture?
Yeah, like SOA, service-oriented architecture.
Okay. So that comes about just before the whole API thing blows up. That's like in terms of ideas, that's the idea before that leads in directly into APIs.
So I think it's, so API stands for Application Programmer Interface. And then there are different standards for APIs. So SOAP, SOAP was the big XML based one that you saw back in the, I know it was definitely, I saw it in my career in the late 90s, right?
Yeah. I used to test SOAP APIs.
Yeah.
My first job.
So you had the SOAP APIs. And, I think SOAP APIs very much prioritized the machine readability over human readability, right? So you had, the WSDL, right? And so your application framework could consume the WSDL. It would become aware of the API structure, and then it could make those API calls to the SOAP XML endpoints. And so that was an API.
And it was kind of, I feel like it had a precursor of like there was like a relationship prerequisite. Like, could you just consume anyone's API at that point, or did you kind of have to get the WSDL from the vendor? And then like you usually had to send an email to ask, and then they'll give it to you and you have it locally. And then you have this like setup aspect.
Yeah. The concepts of like what you call like developer self-service or developer portals or the discovery of the APIs was not the way things were done. And I think, so then we move on to the REST APIs, representational state transfer, which is now you see REST and GraphQL and a few other things, the ones you usually see. But REST is kind of the big one that changed things. And that took...
was that Tim Berners-Lee or was that someone else?
No, that was Roy Fielding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Dr. Roy Fielding put out his doctoral dissertation really on representational state transfer. And it's this concept of... So I think a lot of the SOAP XML and definitely at ODBC, you had what was called CRUD, right? So CRUD was create, read, update, delete. Those are your basic, insert, select, update, delete. It really matched SQL queries, and it was really about doing table level operations.
Okay.
Whereas with REST, representational, right? So if I have a representation of an e-commerce order on the back end of a database might involve a customer record, an address record, a sales tax record, the items from inventory, the quantity, the shipper, the tracking code. Through that abstraction, and the other term you often hear is the orchestration of the underlying database tables, or going back to multiple databases or multiple systems, because these days if you're calculating sales tax, you're probably calling another API that is some sales tax API, right? And so you're able to represent this business object or this business concept through REST, and the end in the client server world, the software client would have to be aware of all of those tables. through the ODBC connection and make all of the queries and things like that. I mean, you could do it with stored procedures, but that would be more advanced, right? So I select from customers, where it is I select from orders, where blah, 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 blah. With REST, all that is abstracted on the server side there. So that, and then that's what, to your point about, can I just go and get access to it? That's what really helps enable that, because I don't have to go and teach an API consuming developer who's building that mobile app that's going to interface with my e-commerce store how to work with every table, right? I mean, it used to be these giant, big, thick binders of documents with table schema diagrams. Developers had to know and reference to do it all. Now you just work with the REST API.
And it probably gave away some competitive advantage too when you share the entire world, your data structure. I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that, but like it seems like a more like private way to kind of expose your business functionality is probably through REST, because you don't have to say like you have to share the world what your schema looks like.
Right. So you could have things like, so for example, in like a credit card context, right? You could have credit scores, right? The ability to, easily query a credit score without having to know how it's calculated, right? Or, maybe instead of being able to see exactly how many of an item is in stock, it could be like a yes, no, it's in stock, or a soft like, oh, quantities are low, without having to say there are 5 left. So, and then the interesting thing is, like a well-designed API with those abstractions, you can change those responses on the server side. So let's say I'm a company and for whatever reason, I've got an affiliate program. And so everybody can sell my stuff on their website. And I want to change something about how quantities are displayed or discount or pricing. I change it once on the server side, and then those rules, because they're consuming my API, if it's all well-designed, immediately take effect on all of the client softwares without them having to update it. It's a little bit of an oversimplified question there, but yeah, it makes it really accessible there. And I think, so kind of to the historical question there, yeah, so Dr. Roy Fielding, he had it in his dissertation there. It's very much based off of the HTTP protocol. And so really so you mentioned Tim Berners-Lee, right? So the work that Tim Berners-Lee did for the World Wide Web with HTTP, and there's a concept of verbs within HTTP, certain error codes that say things about like, can this representation be found? Can this representation be updated? Yes, it's been successfully updated. So like, just like there's a 404 not found, which you've probably seen when you're browsing the web, in a REST API, 404 literally means like the representation of that thing cannot be found.
These are client representations, right?
Client yeah. Or okay. Coming from the server side to the client there. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think where I first really saw this popularized was in the Ruby on Rails community, and specifically at, I think it was RailsConf, I want to say 2005, but I might have that year wrong, where they gave the folks at Basecamp, I think it was DHH, gave this talk where the next version of Rails was fully going to support this. And then you saw so much kind of follow on. And I think the key here you have, along with the representation, is the concept of semantics, right? That what you see in a URL or a URI semantically represents the business object in as much plain language as possible, without having to have somebody, again, have the big, thick documentation binder. So if I come to somebody who is publishing an API, I shouldn't have to completely learn all the inner workings of their multi-departmental business just to program against their systems. If they have, very semantically well-structured, well-represented APIs, I can read the API documentation, I can understand that, and then I can begin working with those APIs very quickly and start to see those resultant outcomes very quickly.
Is it true that basically the way APIs started was that, I think it was maybe Salesforce wanted to expose some of their application logic, which they had worked hard to develop, and they wanted to basically self-serve it instead of trying to sell it through like a typical sales process. And so they started to give people access tokens and give people access to their API, or essentially their business logic, and expose it. And then those people would pay money for that access to that application logic. and then quickly got adopted by a bunch of people, including Amazon, which ended up taking it a step further. Is that how it started? Like in 2000, like I guess it was maybe 2006-ish? Is that when APIs kind of blew up? And maybe it was Salesforce, maybe it was Twitter that I'm thinking about. It was one of the two.
Yeah,
Salesforce
Twitter definitely had it. I will have to plead a little bit of ignorance on exactly which one of those was first. The concept you described there about getting the tokens, the monetization, the platform, and everything, 100%. Yeah, that's the value proposition of what an open and accessible API ecosystem offers. At that time in my career, I was way off focused in the nonprofit world, and so I was working with products like Blackbaud, Razor's Edge, and stuff like that. Not so much in the commercial world there with Salesforce. It wouldn't surprise me if they were first, but that bit of history of kind of who was the first self-service platform, the very first. I don't know the exact history around that. I do know that when I was in a digital product manager job at Capital One, that Stripe and Twilio were two that we really looked at as figuring out how to do it very well from that developer self-service perspective, to the point where, if it was Salesforce that had done it first, Stripe and Twilio had taken it both to the next step of that's actually how they were acquiring their customers, right? So in the Salesforce example you give, it's like, all right, I'm an enterprise. I choose Salesforce as my CRM system of record. And then developers, either in my enterprise, can then get access to Salesforce and build things on it for my enterprise, or third parties can go and get access and build products on top of it. Stripe and Twilio took that one step further, and there's others that have done it as well, but they were two that really were successful at the beginning, where instead of like selling Stripe or selling Twilio at that time to the enterprise, they would sell the capability through their APIs to developers who could come on, get that token and pay, and then monetize it. And so it was really that developer first versus boardroom first sale there. But you may very well be right. It may have been Salesforce that did it first.
So, but in the case of Salesforce, like some procurement team or some like leadership team is going to be like, hey, we need to build this system. We're either going to hire a team of developers to do it, or we're going to have to buy it, and let's just buy it, and then we'll essentially buy access to this logic. Lord have mercy. Sorry. And so then I guess in the case of that, what you're describing, yeah, that's a really interesting nuance, is that like that the decision's already made, and they're saying, hey, developers, go build a super fast system to do XYZ, and the developers are like, okay, and then they're like, hey, let's go integrate with Twilio because they can do the heavy lifting of what this logic is we need to build.
Yeah, and I think to get even a little bit more focused on your first point, I think what you said there was, that they've got Salesforce and then they want to go and buy the API access. In the example of Stripe or Twilio, they're not even customers. So it'd be like as if my company is not a customer of Salesforce at all and becomes a customer because a developer had a need to store a customer record, which is fundamentally isn't how, a big package like Salesforce, it's a per seat license negotiation.
Right.
Whereas a Stripe or Twilio, fundamentally, those companies' products, and it's changed now how they're sold as they've scaled, but initially, fundamentally, how this, where this enterprise is not a customer of mine. Instead of a business person calling up a salesperson and negotiating a usage-based contract, it is that developer who wants to integrate payments. So they go to Stripe, they get a token, they get the demo keys, they can do it all. And then, they tell the CFO, oh, we're going to get charged this fee. Okay, that's good. So it is truly about like that comes down to really the API and developer platform as being the means of enterprise customer acquisition for those particular, technology platform products there. And
what's up with that evolution? Why is it like that? Is it because it strikes me as funny that don't get me wrong, I have a lot of pride as an engineer, and I like to think that we are the ones who automatically are going to figure out where the value is, or the best way to do something. But is it because the leadership people are too, are they behind the times? Are they, do they not understand the needs, the ways to improve efficiencies? Like, how come this is coming from the developers who aren't necessarily, they have a whole different stake in the game, if you think about it, than a leadership team. So why is it coming from them?
So I think if you take it to there's two ways that an enterprise, there's always that buy versus build, right? So if we let's use the credit card example of Stripe, right? I've helped clients back in the days of .com and e-commerce set up payment processing to be a merchant that accepts credit cards, right? And oftentimes that was sold through the banking relationship, right? The CFO would go to the bank and say, we need to be able to take credit cards on our website. And the bank would say, here is this solution that we have. And here is this SDK, the software development kit, and this documentation. Give this to your developers and tell them that this is what they're going to use, right? So the enterprise chose to buy this solution. I think what we've seen here now is more and more enterprises are building, and many of those choices are then the builders are empowered to choose what components they want to use in their solution. They're not going to call the company's bank and ask them, what does the bank recommend? They're going to go and Google search or Stack Overflow or Twitter, and then they're going to be like, oh, well, yeah, hey, Stripe is awesome to integrate with, easy to integrate with, and here's this document I can share with my CFO. Hey, here's what it's going to cost. Yep, fully compliant, check all the boxes. Okay, go. And by the way, in the same amount of time it took me to like download and send the pricing information to the CFO, I also have a demo to show them. And now the overall build cost is decreased. So it becomes, I think, about, kind of the build versus buy mentality, and who is either empowered to make those decisions or who is just making those decisions. And, there's this whole concept of like decision fatigue. All right. Oh gosh. Well, now we don't have to worry about the payment processor. Okay. We went with Twilio. We don't have to worry about how we're sending the SMS confirmations. Let's move on to a higher value decision as opposed to really spending a lot of time with the banker on how do we do credit card processing.
I'd love to bring you back on for a second episode just on the topic of buy versus build, because I find it fascinating, especially when you get into sort of the management layers of the different thoughts between what engineers feel, what your management team feels, what your executives feel, and in general, is there like a trend right now or not? So not getting into that topic at all, but I think that's another
we could definitely
topic.
Do an episode on that, and then the people who have bought or built.
Exactly.
What they do the next time they get to choose whether to buy or build. There's all kinds of like enterprise buyer persona type archetypes there that we could explore for sure.
I think I think 20 minutes ago, what I did want to mention was that I think the power of APIs seems to be, or there seems to be a lot of power of an APIs abstracting all that complex logic. So in a way, it really just you're getting what you need maybe instantaneously these days, in real time, and that allows you to go do what you're really good at rather than diving to someone else's expertise and domain and trying to figure it out just to maybe do a simple transaction. So
yeah, and I think, if you look at, right, how is software built these days, and you look at the prevalence of Agile, right? And Agile wants developers to commit to stories and to deliver stories, story over story, with a certain velocity. And so in a way, that is creating almost a market dynamic. And what do I choose, right? Sometimes it's, I'm going to choose the thing that helps with my story completion velocity, right? And again, is that the big old SDK from the bank's chosen merchant processor? Or is that just, oh, cool, REST APIs with Stripe? And by the way, I'm using REST API for the 20 other things that as an enterprise I'm integrating with in the solution. And now you have a whole new problem, right? I said it doesn't make things simpler necessarily, because now you've got all these third parties that you're onboarding, and you have your one software roadmap. Well, now you've got 20 other vendors' software roadmaps you have to keep up with, and you start to get into the whole unique, subset of third-party API management with API gateways, and how do you fail gracefully when one of the dozen, I know an e-commerce client we worked with, they probably had about a dozen or 15 different third-party APIs that they had to call to complete a transaction, right? And so what happens if the tax API is down, right? Do they lose a multi-$1,000 sale, or do they just return a 200 OK, log the error, and let it go? And on that transaction, take the taxes out of the back end of it rather than bombing out the whole thing. So it does create this interconnected web of complexity sometimes.
So we are coming up at the hour, and we do want to be respectful of your time as well. So we want to shift a little bit to, we heard that you're a Richmond native. So what are some of the things that you love doing in the Richmond area?
Good question. I've always enjoyed photography, and I think Richmond is a city that has so many photogenic places. And lately, as I've been here, I'm 43 now, and people, yes. And I'm not so much on like the street. It's not like New York where you're doing the street photography of the fashionable people. I think you might get beat down for doing that in Richmond. That's not quite my thing there. But I what I'm seeing now as well is like, as Richmond's history is evolving, I remember, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, seeing historic pictures of Richmond. So much history has happened in Richmond. And now I realize, like, I have pictures in my collection of buildings that no longer exist, or all of Tobacco Row before I was like, oh, wow. It's like, all right, so you see the passage of time and history. So it's really that rich texture. And then, maybe it's cliche to say, but the outdoors, the mountain biking, the river, everything there, I love about Richmond, and just the ease of getting around and how quickly, you can get to know people and meet people and kind of create those social connections and, just the general friendliness. And I enjoy travel. What I always say is I always love traveling anywhere I can, anytime I can. Richmond is always a great place to come back home to.
I love that line. I haven't heard that before, and that just rings so true. It's like, yeah, it's a great place to live. It doesn't have a lot of like the super like sexy things that would make you want to like go. Like, for example, it doesn't have the same like spice and like excitement as like New York City or LA or San Diego or, Miami, but it's got this like really solid homey vibe that like just makes it a wonderful place to live.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. We definitely don't want to take up too much of your evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. And man, I totally second what Julia said about, having a second round just to talk about buy versus build, because that's a hot topic always.
Yeah, we could go deep on that one for sure. Absolutely. I'd love to join you all again and talk about that. And thank you for having me on for this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. This podcast is co-hosted by Ford Pryor and Julia Barnhart. You can find us both on LinkedIn. Produced by rvatech, which, if you don't already know, is a professional organization committed to building a stronger tech community in Richmond. Edited by Claire Morgan at nodderly.com and sponsored by Accenture, a new member of rvatech.